Well, today we are starting kind of a series where we're looking at some of the miracle stories of Jesus in Mark, starting chapter 8, going through 9 and 10 for the next few weeks. And we're kind of starting this rotation of pastors that we often do in the summer. And so we'll see different ones of us here and there. So don't be surprised with a different face next week when you're here. But we are kind of letting everybody get to experience the different pastoral preachers that we have. And then we get back to kind of normal schedule in August, first part of August, and the rotating will kind of quit. But right now we're sort of in that sort of cycle. We're looking at this part in Matthew chapter 8 today that it follows, if you go back into Matthew, you have the birth of Jesus, the genealogies, and then chapter 4 is when he is tempted of Satan. And then chapter 5 begins the Sermon on the Mount. 5, 6, 7 are all this very key teachings. And then it's like he's gotten down the whys here, what he's going to teach about, and it's time for Jesus to get to work. And in chapter 8, he just starts going everywhere. I mean, he is going here and back and forth, across the lake, back across the Lake of Gennesaret or the Sea of Galilee, and he's healing people left and right. And so when you get there, in chapter 8, there's the centurion servant that he's asked to heal, and then he comes back, and they're in Tiberias, and his Peter's mother-in-law, she has a fever, and he heals her, and then they go across the sea, and they go into the area of the Gentiles, and there's a man who has demons, and he casts the demons out of the pigs. The pigs jump in the lake. We don't know what happens to the pigs. Doesn't sound real good. The man, he's doing fine. And then we cross back across the lake, and in chapter 9, a paralytic man is brought to Jesus, and then he calls Matthew. And in the midst of calling Matthew to be his disciple, and Matthew was an odd choice, to be honest, as a disciple. He was a tax collector. Now, we think of people who work for the IRS. We don't think badly of people who work for the IRS. We kind of feel sorry for them, but we don't really feel badly for them. We don't hate them, but people who worked as tax collectors in Jesus' days were hated because they were collecting taxes not for the Jewish state, but for the Roman state. And they would often take a cut of those taxes. And so for Jesus to ask Matthew to be his disciple was to ask someone who was in a really bad social class that would not have been respected. And immediately, following his asking that, the Pharisees start saying, hey, why did you ask Matthew? Of all the people you could have asked to be a disciple, I mean, you're going from really not a great category at all religiously to being the disciple of a rabbi, a traveling rabbi. I mean, that's a huge leap in spiritual progress, and we're not seeing it in Matthew. And so they start griping, and in the midst of all their griping, the head of the sort of the chair of the church council comes up, and there's all the Pharisees, they're the religious leaders, but he's the one who actually schedules things in the synagogue. Not caring what they say, says, Jesus, my daughter needs healing. I need you to come and heal her. And so he takes off, and on the way, another lady grabs the hem of his garment. And we'll read about that. And we saw what that meant when, particularly in Jesus' day, it was only men. Today in certain forms of Judaism, be men and women, when they're turn 13 at their bar mitzvah, they're given a prayer shawl. And it has these long uh, uh, tassels that are off of it. And it's to be reminded of all of the commandments. And so she would have grabbed at one of those tassels, and it seemed that Jesus knew what was happening. And so she had had a hemorrhage for many years, and that would have made her ritually unclean. And here was another person, again, not in the right religious category, but Jesus heals her and changes her life, just as he had healed the life of Matthew by bringing him out into a different state. So let's pick up on that passage. It's in Matthew chapter 9, beginning with verse 9. It kind of skips around a little bit. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, and he goes to the house of Matthew to have dinner, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire not mercy, not sacrifice. I have not come for the righteous, but for sinners." And then we're going to jump over several verses to the next passage. This is while they were saying these things, a leader of the synagogue came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hands on her, and she will live." And Jesus had got up and followed him with his disciples in tow. And then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she said to herself, "If only I touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned to her and said, "Take heart, daughter." And that's the only place that Jesus calls anyone daughter in the New Testament. "Your faith has made you well." And instantly the woman was made well. And Jesus came to the leader's house, saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, going into the morning ceremony and the morning sort of, it was a big, if someone passed away, the morning, you would actually hire people to mourn so that you'd have a big show of that. He said, "Go away. The girl's not dead, but she's sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put aside, outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up, and the report of this spread throughout the district. Now notice that Jesus grabbed her hand. In the two stories that we have, this is the Word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. The two stories that sort of a miracle within the miracle. In both cases, either they reached out to Jesus or Jesus reached out to them. The girl's father reached out to Jesus and said, "Can you help me with my daughter?" In each of those, someone reached out to Jesus and said, "This is beyond my control. I need help." We were blessed to get to take our family. Our oldest son is pushing 26. He's 25. And to get everybody happy on a vacation, once you get to that age, you got from high school to 25, it's a tough sell. And so we took a cruise and got some different rooms for folks. And that allowed my wife and I to have time alone and the kids to go and do their thing. And so we didn't have to worry about being on the boat, didn't have to worry about things. And so we would often go in the mornings to get breakfast. Now, our preference is to go to one of the dining rooms, but sometimes we were too lazy to get up in time. We'd have to go to the main sort of cafeteria area, the serve yourself area on a cruise ship. And I don't like to go there because you have to fight in every line for a piece of food. And so by the time you fight 5 or 6 different lines, it's nice to have the food, but you're kind of exhausted from the fight. But anyway, so we would go and we went to the buffet, and we love fresh brewed iced tea. And I don't know if you've ever been on a cruise, but you can't get fresh brewed iced tea on a cruise. They have this stuff that they claim is fresh brewed iced tea, but for those of us from the South, we know this is an untruth. And so we have a little way around that. We get hot tea. They think we're British or something, and we get hot tea, and then we ask for a cup of ice, and we pour it over the top of it, and so then we have iced tea, and nobody knows the better. So we were at the buffet, and I had one glass of iced tea here, one glass of iced tea here, and I had 2 hot cups of hot tea walking through the crowd, kind of like this, and trying not to get a bump. Of course, the ship is moving, and it is burning my fingers, and it's starting to scald. And this man stops and says, "Would you like some help?" And of course, me, prideful guy, "No, I've got this handled. Doesn't it look like I'm doing perfectly fine with this?" As I'm burning. And I go about another 2 or 3 feet, and Stephanie walks by and says, give me the tea. She doesn't ask, she just says, "Give me the tea." And we go. It's fascinating how we don't want to ask for help. It's kind of against our nature. We want to be self-sufficient, and we teach our children to be self-sufficient, but in the reality, if we are to be followers of Jesus, if we are to live in community, part of that is giving help, but part of that is having the courage to ask for help. It's fascinating, in these 2 stories, both asked for Jesus' help. It was more than they could have handled by themselves. And so they go there, and Jesus helps them. Now, so often in life, we forget to ask God for help. We work on things ourselves, we come up with plans, but it's hard for us to take a step back and realize that God really should be the first person that we ask for help. But so often, it's the other way. It's the last person that we ask for help. We were able to also, on this trip, we took a sea kayak kind of thing and snorkeled. Now, I love to kayak. Many of you know that I like to kayak the rivers around here. I always look for rivers that are very narrow, that have a little bit of flow, because you have a lot of shade, so you don't get hot. If you go out in the Cabo River, it's real wide, and so it's hot, and so I don't like to do that. So I find narrow ones. I discovered that the Caribbean is really not narrow. It's just kind of wide, and when you get out there in a kayak, it's really hot. And so we had 2 hours of that, and we also it was a tandem kayak, and that means you have 2, and so you have to learn how to. Oh, there we got a picture of it. That's I think Macy's head, and so you've got one person in the front, one person in the back, and you have to learn how to work together. Now, there was one boat, one kayak in our group. Fortunately, it wasn't ours. Could have been, but it wasn't. They never figured it out, and they literally had to get towed by the guide because they could not figure out how to work together. But you have to give and take and know when to paddle and when not to paddle. And if you get it straight and you get it down, then man, you can really, in a 2-person kayak, get some speed going, and makes it easier for everybody. But learning that dance, learning how to work together, is a hard lesson to learn. We discovered the same thing on our 10th anniversary when Stephanie and I were blessed to get to go to San Francisco, and I think we have a picture of that as well. That's us on the Golden Gate Bridge. On the next frame, I tried to get a map of this. We started down here, kind of where it says Pier 39 down that way, and we made it across the Marina District, through the Presidio, across the Golden Gate, and then we came into Sausalito. So we biked all the way to Sausalito, which was probably further than we should have, but it's not the first time that we've done that. So, and it's uphill. You don't realize how high the Golden Gate Bridge is from sea level. But we had to learn how to do that. It was a beautiful experience, one we'll never forget. But learning how to ride we both knew how to ride a bike, but you have to learn to pedal at different times. And the person at the front is the only person that steers. The person in the back has no idea where the bike is even going. And you have to sort of give control up and go, okay, I'm just here to pedal. And sometimes one person gets tired and the other person takes over with the pedaling. But it's a dance that you have to learn. Knowing God and being able to ask God for help is like a dance. We have to learn God's rhythms. We have to learn to work in tandem with what God is doing. And it's not an easy dance to learn because we're used to perhaps paddling our own kayak or riding our own bicycle. But suddenly it's not just about us, it's about being in partnership with God and learning how God does things, and that does things in a slightly different way. As I get older, even though the experience with the tea was not a great light on me, I am getting a little better with asking for help. And particularly with God, as the further I go, the more I realize that there's a lot of things, if I'll just wait, God will sort of lead me. But if I get out ahead, then I'll lose that balance. I lose that. And so there are a lot of times in life when physically we don't know how to change this. And we keep trying, we keep looking for answers. But it's hard for us to say, God, I don't have this. Guide me to the right person. I'm like the woman, I'm grasping for the tassels of your shawl. Show me where I need to go next. There are times mentally when we're at our wits' end and we're not really sure what to do next. And for those who have mental health challenges, we don't know exactly how to deal with this crisis. But it's possible to stop and say, God, I don't know how to deal with this, but I'm reaching my hand out, your tassel, because I know that you are the one who created us. I've learned here that when we have a change in employees, for a long time I'd try to solve it. But I've gotten where I take a step back and say, God, who's the right person? Send the right person at the right time. I'm going to grasp for that tassel again because I want the right person for your kingdom and working for your church. When we have relationship issues, we try to work it in our head of how we handle that. But what if we stopped and said, God, I don't know how to fix this. But help me work with you in tandem with what you're doing in that person's life so that I can solve that problem. Sometimes we have behaviors in our lives or habits that are killing us, that are destroying our marriage, our life, our financial life. And we don't know how to stop. We don't know where to start to stop. And we try and perhaps put ourselves in guilt over that. And it's fascinating to me that the last person we ask for is God to help us figure out where to start to change life. Sometimes we find ourselves financially sinking and we're not sure what to do or where to go. And rather than stopping and waiting for God, we just get anxious. But we find from these two people who had the courage to go to God that we can go to God with anything. Say, could you heal my daughter? Or even with no words, to grasp the tassel, just believe that God can do something that I can't do myself. It takes some practice. It takes time to get to that place. But it's amazing if you read through Matthew 8 and 9, as we're going to be going through in the next few weeks, that person after person who sought Jesus out, he brought healing to them. When they asked, he healed them. God doesn't heal and do things miraculously all the time for everybody the way we expect it. But there is a way to work with God, to learn the way that God dances, the way that we can work in tandem with him. For he puts no limits on our asks. He puts no limitations on our needs. He simply asks us to reach out and pull the hem on his garment. Let's pray together.